Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Qualcomm has, it seems to have approached Intel, according to people familiar. Again, just a headline from the Wall Street Journal. You've got shares of Intel up about 4% as we speak. You've got shares of Qualcomm down about 4% as we speak. So let's get to it with one of the co-hosts of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV, and that is, of course, Ed Ludlow out there.
Honestly, one of the best
West
people
Coast.
we could talk to
I
right
know.
now. Ed Ludlow has sat down with interviews of all the most important CEOs in Silicon Valley, but he's especially familiar with Pat Gelsinger. So I think he's a great guy to talk to on this.
All right. So what do we know? What do you think?
I think well, what we know, very little. The journal, the basics is reporting, citing anonymous sources, that Qualcomm made an approach to Intel in the last few days, and they state in their report that actually they do not have a sense of how receptive Intel is to such a deal. The context is that it's out of left field for two reasons. Intel's just gone through a massive restructuring, which we can discuss the details of, but also for Qualcomm, it doesn't really make any sense. Historically, Qualcomm is a company that designs semiconductors that goes into your smartphone. More recently, they've really wanted to move into the PC field, which historically Intel has dominated. And Qualcomm has made inroads into that market with their own technology. The thing that we don't know is which bit of Intel would Qualcomm on paper want to buy. And so that's why I bring up those 2 points. Because if they wanted Intel's PC business, it would be a departure from the strategy so far, which has worked. If they want the foundry business, the business of manufacturing semiconductors, that's a different kettle of fish altogether.
Well, and are those two businesses going to be separated? Is that something that Gelsinger is really considering moving forward on?
Yes. So the recent news of the week is that Intel is going through a second or restructuring or rethink under Pat Gelsinger. And the biggest part of that is where the foundry business or the manufacturing business is its own standalone entity, its own subsidiary. And this subsidiary would manufacture semiconductors for Intel. Intel designs chips for PCs and for data centers, servers, and a number of other things. But it would also manufacture them for third parties. The Qualcomm story, and again, we do not know this. All we know is that Qualcomm made an approach for Intel, and we don't have any of the financial terms that were offered. But Qualcomm has no experience in manufacturing chips. On this show, Carol, I think I've said this to you so many times in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
But we call these companies chip makers. They are not. They are chip designers, and a third party manufactures it for them. So maybe Qualcomm looks at Intel and goes, that would be quite convenient to have our own manufacturing footprint here in the United States, because that part of Intel's business is kind of humming.
Well, you know, what's funny is when the headline initially crossed, I'm like, okay, this is an Intel story. Like, is Intel getting a lifeline? Like, you know, we've talked with Ian King, who's done great dives, as you know, into how Intel got to where it is today. Having said that, I thought, how much of this is a Qualcomm story? Qualcomm looking to transform itself in a different way, right?
I'm just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but I got the emails in my inbox. Intel declines to comment, so I'm just doing that, you know, because again, the Wall Street Journal story is one citing anonymous sources, and neither company is commenting. It's really difficult to answer. Should we do some math together on how feasible such a deal would be? Qualcomm has a market cap of about $185 billion. Intel has a market cap of around $90 billion. Qualcomm has $13 billion on its balance sheet of cash and cash equivalents. And then there's antitrust. I just said on TV to Alex Steele and Vonnie Quinn, I'm not a banker, guys, I'm a journalist. But I do have some experience in reporting on deals, and I don't know how one would finance such a venture.
Don't undersell yourself, Ed.
Thank you.
You know, to me, it seems like if you're going to strike, now is a pretty good time, because Intel is on its knees. I mean, they have plans to build factories, and people aren't really sure if they're going to be able to go through with it. I know the federal government is aching to give them billions and billions of dollars, but they're having to figure out ways to do that, finding them clients, essentially. So, I mean, if you're going to buy Intel at all, I mean, it's better surely to do it after their stock has fallen 60% year to date.
Yeah, there is an element of timing, and you can talk about year-to-date performance or even the performance of the last 2 years for both companies, relatively speaking. It's just, for me, like, the technology story doesn't make a lot of sense. We interviewed Cristiano Amon, the Qualcomm CEO, many times in the last 2 years. And on earnings in particular, it took a long time for investors to give him credit for his vision of moving Qualcomm beyond a company that did one thing, which is the RF chip in your phone and the modem in your phone, particularly on behalf of the likes of Apple, right? He wanted Qualcomm to design semiconductors that did all kinds of things in cars and now PCs. He wanted to be at the cutting edge of virtual augmented reality headsets. And it took a lot of time to show up in the financials, but it is now showing up in the financials. And so, forget the foundry business for a second. Intel has all these products across PC and data center that Qualcomm is now being competitive in its own right. So why, from a technology perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense either.
Looking at the Journal story, I know you've been looking at it as well. A deal far from certain. The people cautioned to get the deal done, Qualcomm could intend to sell assets or parts of Intel to other buyers. So just a few more aspects of this. It's just kind of interesting to get our head around it, right? There's just so little information. You do wonder. But Intel is in a weaker spot. And I guess we keep trying to think about what is the Intel of the future. The government, in conversations we've had with you and with Ian King about the importance of having Intel as a chip company in the United States is important for national security concerns, right? It's important for the United States. So you do wonder about something seems to have to happen to Intel going forward.
Yeah, I also didn't really answer Matt's question, for which I apologize. And both of your question is basically, well, isn't Intel in a perilous situation? And again, go to the two parts of its business. It used to be a clear leader in many markets, which it's now not. You guys know the story so well. In data centers, everybody wants NVIDIA's GPU to train AI models. Intel didn't have one for quite a long time, but it also was over-indexed towards CPUs, a more basic processor, and then demand fell away. On the foundry side, they wanted to be the factory for chip makers or chip designers all over the world, but they weren't really. And that was why it was significant that they were able to name AWS as a customer to show that they could service a third party. But at the same time, running a business is about how much revenue you're generating, how much you're spending to generate that revenue, and what either your profit and losses are. And they had to do something desperate to react to that, which is all of the projects initiated in the last couple of years were reviewed, and they cut back, they cut headcount. And so they seem to be on a path forward, which again, the timing of this, the Wall Street Journal's report is that Qualcomm approached Intel, not necessarily that Intel was shopping itself or anything like that.
Right. That's a big difference. Isn't that a big difference?
It is a big difference.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, frankly, what this may get me in hot water, I don't know. But Pat Gelsinger's job was on the line. And as of the latest board meeting and strategy review, he survived, right? So I don't necessarily think that makes sense either from his perspective in trying to turn around the company.
I just wonder about the two businesses, Ed. If you had to assign, out of the $90 billion in market cap, if you had to assign some of that to the design business and the rest to the foundry business, how's that breakdown look?
Just quickly, kiddo, got about 30 seconds.
I'm trying to bring up FA Go and give you the actual answer, and I can't. I'm not quick enough. But I think basically that at this point, it's a pretty even split, but the future's predicated on foundry.
Pretty wild. All right. You might have a busy weekend.
I imagine he's going to be working the
Sorry.
phones. And he looks so bummed out. Ed had something planned for tonight, and it's off now.
You can tell. It's like, honey.
My wife watches this show, listens to this show, so yeah.
All right, Ed Ludlow, of course, co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg Television.